Arabazanade, 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 Arabazanade.
Good. So, very good to be here with all of you. I'm glad you're able to come together on such short notice for a talk. So I thought tonight to talk a little bit about the Lam Rim. That's a Tibetan phrase that means the gradual path to enlightenment, and give you a little bit of an overview of the steps to the Lam Rim and how they all fit together. Because if you have this, it becomes very easy to understand all the Buddha's teachings and how they come together to form our practice over a period of time. But before doing that, let's do a little bit of meditation. I think it's nice to sit quietly and let our mind relax. We'll chant a little bit Om Mani Padme Hum to start with, and then afterwards we'll just have a period of silent meditation where you just watch your breath and watch, the inhalation, the exhalation of your breath, and keep your attention on that. And we'll do the chanting beforehand as a way to help us center our mind. When we're doing the chanting, you can visualize in the space in front of you Kuan Yin, in one of the Chinese forms as she appears in China. Or if you'd like, you can visualize Chenrezig, which is the Tibetan name of Kuan Yin, in one of the Tibetan forms. So, however you wish, but visualize, Kuan Yin in the space in front of you with a body made of light. So not a statue, not a painting, but think of Kuan Yin or Chenrezig as a real living being. And as we chant the mantra, light streams from Kuan Yin into us, coming in through the crown of our head and flowing down. Or we can also think of the light absorbing through all the pores of our body. But this light of compassion, which is the nature of Kuan Yin, fills us up from head to toe. Every cell of our body, every part of our nervous system is filled with this compassionate light. And at the same time, we can think of the light as radiating out to all the other living beings surrounding us, and it fills them with this light of compassion, purifying negative karma and inspiring the mind so it can gain all the realizations of the path to enlightenment. So you can join me. Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Mani Padme Hum. Om 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 Mani Padme Hum. And then go right into your breathing meditation, letting your breathing pattern be normal and natural, and simply keeping your attention focused on the breath. If you get distracted, bring your attention back and let your mind relax and be content to sit here and watch your breath. So we'll do this for a few minutes to let our mind settle down. Okay. And when the Buddha taught, he taught for 45 years in ancient India, going from place to place and giving discourses according to the disposition and the interests and the capabilities of whoever happened to be in the audience at that time. So he didn't teach the same thing consistently to everybody, but he really designed each discourse according to the audience, and that's his mark as a very skillful teacher. After the Buddha passed away, there was a council in which the scriptures, the talks, the discourses the Buddha gave were all recited orally, and this was passed down for several centuries just as an oral tradition. And around the 1st century BC, it began to be written down, and then subsequently the whole canon was written down. Later generations of people came upon these vast volumes of teachings that the Buddha gave and said, these teachings are wonderful, but where do I start? There's so much. And what order do I practice these teachings in? And so some of the later sages began to systematize the teachings. And in particular, Atisha, who was a great Indian pandit. He lived in mostly in the 10th century, 11th century, and he systematized the teachings and talked about 3 levels of practitioner, or 3 levels in which one practitioner progresses on the path to enlightenment. Okay, so a beginning level, an intermediate level, and an advanced level. And then later centuries of practitioners, in particular Je Rinpoche or Lama Tsongkhapa, who lived in Tibet in the 14th and early 15th century, systematized the teachings even more. And within these three levels of motivation, really spread out or stated very clearly, what is the motivation of each level of practitioner? What are the meditations that that person does in order to generate that motivation? And then having generated that motivation, what meditations does that person do in order to realize the motivation or actualize what that motivation is aspiring for? Okay, and that started this whole system of long rim or gradual path texts. So I thought to give you a little bit of an overview of this tonight, because the thing is that if we have this kind of overview, then whenever we hear any teaching, we know where in the gradual path it belongs. And in that way we don't get confused. Because one of the things that I really noticed when I first came to Singapore in 1987 was that many people had heard teachings, but they were very confused about how to practice them. Because one weekend, one master comes in and teaches about generosity, and the next weekend the next master comes in and teaches about karma, and the next weekend somebody else comes in and talks about the three characteristics, and the weekend after that somebody comes in and gives an initiation, and people were going, what do I do? How do I put this together into practice? And this is where I really saw the advantages of knowing the long rim, the gradual path. Because if you know that, then you know where these different topics belong, and so you know what order to practice them in and how they relate to all the other teachings you hear. So it prevents a lot of confusion. Okay, so let's look at these three levels of practitioner. The first level, the beginning level practitioner, is somebody who is interested in the happiness within cyclic existence. Okay? So they want to have a better life now, and in particular they want to have a good life in their next rebirth. Okay, that's their aspiration. The middle level practitioner has upped the ante a little bit, and they're saying, well, happiness in samsara is okay, but there's no lasting security in that. And actually, real happiness is getting out of cyclic existence. So the middle level practitioner aspires for nirvana, or liberation. They want to get out of cyclic existence. Then, the advanced level of practitioner says, nirvana's great, but that's only me. What about everybody else? And so that person is the one who aspires for the bodhisattva path, who looks around and says, actually, I have some responsibility for the well-being of all sentient beings, and so I'm going to aspire for full enlightenment so I can help others in the most effective way. Okay? So you see the three different levels of motivation of those three practitioners, and you can see how it's progressive. You can't get to the top without going through the first ones. Okay? So let's go back to the beginning. Now, the person who wants happiness in cyclic existence. And that kind of describes us in a very gross way, doesn't it? Okay. Like I was saying, the first level practitioner, they want happiness this life, but especially they want a good future rebirth. Well, let's just look at us, ourselves, honestly. When you wake up in the morning, do you think, I've got a plan for my next rebirth? No. What do we think about when we wake up in the morning? What's your first thought in the morning? There's somebody who's honest. I like that. Coffee. Okay? Now, first thought, pleasure. Yeah? What's going to give me pleasure? Coffee. Yeah. Or sometimes the first thought is one of displeasure. Why doesn't that alarm clock go off? I want to go back to sleep. I don't want to wake up yet. Okay? So you can see our first thought in the morning, it's always thinking about my pleasure now, isn't it? And as we go through our day, what are we thinking about the most? My pleasure now. True? Well, let's be honest. Yeah, I mean, do you wake up in the morning and think about the people in Iraq who are living in a war zone? No. Okay. We're thinking about ourselves. Are we even thinking about the fact that we're stuck in cyclic existence? No. We're thinking about how can I go to work and make more money so I can buy more things that I like, so I have a better reputation. True? Yeah. How can I be around nice people? And the definition of a nice person is somebody who likes me. Doesn't matter whether they have good qualities or not. The bottom line is if they like me, they're a nice person. If they don't like me, they're a creep. Right? Okay. They could have many good qualities, but if they don't like us, they're a horrible person. Okay. So we want to be around nice people. We want to see nice things, taste good food, have the temperature be right, smell good smells, hear nice music, have everybody tell us how nice we are, how wonderful we are, how much they love us, how talented and intelligent we are, and how they've never met anybody as wonderful as us. Right? Isn't that your definition of a good day when somebody treats you like that? Okay. That's what we're looking for. Right? Yeah? Okay? So we go through our whole day just seeking to get things that satisfy our attachment, that satisfy our egotistical mind. And at the same time, we seek to get away from anyone and anything that threatens our sense of well-being. So somebody criticizes me, get them away. Okay? Somebody makes food I don't like, get it away. Somebody asks me to work overtime, yeah. Unless I can get time and a half. Then if I get extra money, working overtime's okay. Okay? So you can see our very basic view. I mean, we're so incredibly self-centered, aren't we? Just incredibly. And, you know, we put on this big show like we're so kind, we're so benevolent, we're really compassionate. But basically, at the bottom line is me and my pleasure, ASAP. You know, no delay. So this mind of seeking my happiness now has been the mind that has kept us in the cycle of suffering. Yeah. It's very interesting because the more we aspire for my happiness now, the more miserable we are. Why? Because we become so sensitive to everything that has to do with me that we inflate it out of proportion. Another reason why this selfish, limited motivation makes us unhappy is that through trying to get our own happiness ASAP, we commit a lot of negative actions. You know, we steal, we cheat, we talk behind people's back, we gossip about them, we get angry at them, we yell and scream at them. You know, we have sexual affairs, we lie, we do all sorts of stuff, okay? In this attempt to be happy. In the process, we create a lot of negative karma, and we obscure our mind with this negative karma. And then, of course, that's what ripens. and causes us to have suffering. Okay? So this self-centered mind, although it seems, initially to be on our side, and if we follow it, it's going to bring us happiness, actually our whole experience, if we sit down and examine it well, is that this mind makes us more and more miserable. And so, that's why the dividing line between Dharma and non-Dharma is whether we have the mind aspiring to the happiness of this life or whether we don't have that mind, whether we have a higher motivation, let's say seeking a good rebirth or liberation or enlightenment. Okay? So that's the dividing line between Dharma and non-Dharma, is our motivation. And this is something to be really careful about, because if we're not careful, we can think that we're doing a lot of Dharma practice, but all we're doing is creating the cause for more suffering. Okay? For example, we might give a huge amount in offering, but if our motivation is we want our name on the donor list at the top so everybody knows how generous we've been, we're not being generous at all. We're being quite self-centered, even though we gave a huge donation. Okay. So there's many ways in which we can look good, but actually not be practicing. I mean, we can do lots and lots of chanting, but when we're chanting, if we're just chanting because, well, that's what you do, and in the meantime, while we're chanting, we like the melody, but we're not really focused on the meaning of the words, then, we're kind of like a tape recorder, aren't we? Except sometimes the tape recorder chants better than us. Yeah, we get lost in the text. At least the tape recorder doesn't. Okay? So you can see that we have to really look at our motivation. Are we having the motivation, my happiness now, or are we seeking something beyond our own happiness of this life? That's the dividing line. Okay? And it's actually quite difficult to have a true Dharma motivation. Most of us at the beginning, and for quite a while, we have a very mixed motivation. And we'll have some parts of our life where we really have a Dharma motivation, and then other times in our life where we're right back into my happiness now. Okay? So, a good part of our Dharma practice is actually about purifying our motivation. Because why we do something is more important than what we do. So it's very hard to be a hypocrite in Buddhism. We can act like a hypocrite. We can act like we're, some great practitioner, but actually not be one. But all we're doing is fooling ourselves, because we're the one who's creating the karma. And if we create negative karma, we experience the result of that negative karma. Even if every other human being on the planet is praising us and thinks that we're wonderful, and bows down to us and calls us a great master, if our mind, it doesn't have a Dharma motivation, we're just creating cause for misery. So it's quite an important thing. And I think this was one of the things I really appreciated when I first met the Dharma, was this emphasis on our motivation and on being completely truthful with ourselves about why we do what we do. Because we're only fooling ourselves when we rationalize and make excuses and justify and go into denial and everything like that. We're only harming ourselves. So that's why the initial level person, the initial level practitioner, starts out with this motivation of my happiness now. And the first way they begin to stretch that motivation is to think of my happiness in the future life. So they're still thinking about their own happiness, but there's a difference. It's not this selfish immediacy of, I've got to have my pleasure now and I'm going to do anything that I have to do to get it right now. But instead, it's, I want a good rebirth. And so I realize to have a good rebirth, I have to create the causes of it. What are the causes of a good rebirth? Keeping good ethical discipline. Okay? So that's what that first level practitioner begins to practice. But what do they meditate on to get themselves to that point where they actually want a good future life? Because that's not an idea that pops into our mind automatically, is it? Okay. So that person begins by thinking about the preciousness of their present human life and how rare it is to get this opportunity and all the purpose and meaning that this life can have. And the purpose and meaning of this life being, having a spiritual goal and progressing towards it. In other words, this person begins to realize that the purpose and meaning of this life is not to make money, not to have a good status in society, not to have a good sex life and a great family and be very popular. But purpose and meaning of this life involves looking beyond just this lifetime. Okay? And so that person not only considers the advantages of their precious human life now, but they realize that it's not going to last forever. So they start thinking about impermanence, the fact that everything's changing moment by moment. They start contemplating death, realizing that all of us, each of us is just a little bubble, and at some point, bing, our life is going to pop and we're no longer here. Now, the planet's going to go on very well without us, and we're not here. And that person, in thinking about their own death, they also begin to think about what happens after death. And they begin to think, well, I could have a good rebirth, but I could also have a rotten rebirth. That's entirely possible. Okay, so that person begins to look at their own actions. And have I created, enough positive karma so that I can be sure to have a good rebirth? And how much negative karma have I created out of my self-centered mind? That's going to lead me into suffering in my next rebirth. So that person starts becoming, concerned with what they're going to be reborn as. Because the thing is that if you get a lower rebirth, as a hungry ghost or hell being or even as an animal, not only is there suffering in that life, but it's very difficult to practice the Dharma and it's difficult to escape from the lower realms. Okay? For example, it's difficult for animals to keep good ethical discipline. I have 2 little cats at home, at the Abbey. And they're old now, but when they were younger, they used to go out and catch mice and birds. And I tried to talk to them and say, the mice and birds want to live just like you do. Don't kill other living beings. And my cats would just look at me like, what are you talking about? Okay? So, we can see that if we get a lower rebirth, even the fundamental practice of ethical discipline is too difficult for us to practice. Okay? So by thinking about precious human life, by thinking about impermanence and death, by thinking about the possibility of a lower rebirth, then that person says, oh, I want to have an upper rebirth. I want to be born in the celestial realm as a god or a demigod or as a human being. And they start to think, well, what do I need to practice in order to attain that? And the first thing they realize is that they have to go to refuge, to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Okay, so here's where the topic of refuge comes in, is that we begin to make a decision about what our spiritual path is, and who our guides are, and what direction we're going in spiritually. Okay? So we see that the Dharma, in other words, the spiritual realizations, are the actual medicine, because when we've actualized the Dharma in our mind is free. The Buddha is the one who described the path to gain those realizations, and the Sangha are those beings who have direct perception of reality, who are reliable guides and encourage us on the path. Okay? So the first thing that we do as an initial level being in our practice is to take refuge. Having taken refuge and decided that the Buddha is our guide, what's the first advice that the Buddha gives us? Okay. First thing the Buddha says, is to clean up your act. Okay? That's slang for keep good ethical discipline. Okay. So that's where the talk of the 10 negative actions comes in, and abandoning the 10 negative actions and taking the 5 precepts, because we begin to look at our life and evaluate our actions. And I think this is something that is very, very helpful for us, not only spiritually but psychologically, because I think a lot of our mental unhappiness comes from not having good ethical discipline. For example, when we kill, we don't feel good about ourselves. Yeah? When we steal things and take things that don't belong to us, we don't feel good about ourselves. When we have extramarital affairs, we know we're hurting other people. We don't feel good. Okay? When we lie, when we use our speech to create disharmony, when we say harsh words, when we gossip and spend a lot of time going blah, blah, blah. Yeah. In our heart's not peaceful and smooth. There's roughness, there's agitation, there's disharmony in our own heart. When we're very greedy and we're just always thinking about how to get more for ourselves, or when we're overrun by malicious thoughts and thinking how to get revenge on others, when our mind is full of wrong views, we're not very happy now, and we create a lot of negative karma, which is the cause for unhappiness in future lives. Okay? So when the Buddha said, clean up your act, he meant start looking at your behavior, what you're thinking, what you're saying, what you're doing, and start evaluating it and seeing what behavior causes happiness and what behavior causes suffering. And then start to restrain yourself, practice ethical restraint, so that we don't do the actions that cause suffering. Okay? So in Buddhism, the whole topic of ethics is something that the Buddha described. The Buddha didn't make up the ethical system. This is the difference between Christianity and Buddhism. In Christianity, there was a creator God, and then God made up the ethical system, and God rewards you or punishes you. In Buddhism, there is no creator God. There's no external creator, but rather our mind is the creator of happiness and suffering, according to what we think, what we say, and what we do. So nobody else is punishing us, nobody else is rewarding us. But in our own life, if we plant the seeds of happiness through having a kind heart, through being compassionate and generous, we reap the result of that. If we plant in our life the seeds of suffering by being angry and resentful and greedy, then we plant those seeds in our mind we receive the result of misery. And it's just like a natural law. Nobody's rewarding us, nobody's punishing us, and we're responsible for what happens to us in our life. So while we're responsible, we're not alone in the universe without support, because we have the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha that support us and encourage us and teach us and guide us and inspire us. Okay? But we've got to practice, that's the bottom line. Okay? We can't sit there and go, Buddha, I want to be happy. If you make me happy, Buddha, I'll give you some oranges. Yeah, that's not the way to practice. We're not doing business with the Buddha. You can't bow down at the altar and say, you know, Buddha, I've been offering you incense every day this year. You know, it's cost me a lot of money. You better give me some good fortune in my life. Okay, we're not doing business. But instead, we're trying to plant the seeds of happiness in our own mind through what we say and what we think and what we do, and avoid the seeds of suffering, or purify, take out the seeds of suffering that we've planted in the past under the influence of our ignorance. Okay? So that's the initial level practitioner. No? That's how they generate their motivation for future life, and that's how they actualize it. Now, sometimes the question comes, well, why are we talking so much about future lives? I thought the Buddha said, be in the present moment and live in the present moment and get rid of all your hopes and fears about the past and present. So what are you talking about, caring about future lives? That's going to take me out of the present. Actually, it doesn't. This is very interesting. If you're really focused on creating the cause for happiness in future lives, then you live more in the present. And listen to why this happens. Because if we look right now, okay, are we living in the present, most of us? Or are we usually thinking about the past and the future? We're usually thinking about the past and the future, aren't we? Feeling guilty about the past, or daydreaming about something in the past, or fearing something in the future, or hoping for something good in the future. We're very seldom actually in the present moment experiencing it, living it in a really vital way, because our mind's completely involved with attachment and aversion, resentment, arrogance, and all these, afflictions take us out of the present moment. When we start to aspire for a good rebirth, and we begin to see that our good rebirth depends upon what we're saying, thinking, and doing now, and that attachment, anger, jealousy, ignorance, arrogance cause us to create negative karma, then we banish those defiled attitudes from our mind. Okay? We apply the countermeasures to those negative emotions. And by freeing our mind from gross levels of attachment and aversion and jealousy and arrogance, then what's left is enjoying the present moment. Because we're no longer taken into the past or the future under the influence of attachment and anger. Okay? So do you see how caring for future lives enables us to have a clearer mind and live this life in a much more vital way and really live in the present moment? So those two things are not contradictory. Caring for future lives and living in the present moment. They go together. So that's the initial level practitioner. That's where we gotta start off with. And that's already a lot for us, isn't it? Yeah? When we think about the 10 negative actions, I don't know about you, but I've done all 10. Okay, so stopping them, okay, that's going to be a little bit of work here. Okay, but very worthwhile. Let's go on to the middle level practitioners so we can get the full idea of where we're going in the path. The middle level practitioner, continues on from that first level. And they start thinking about all the disadvantages of cyclic existence. And they begin to think, well, okay, I get a good future life, good rebirth in my future life, but I'm still under the influence of ignorance, attachment, and anger, which means I'm still going to die, I'm still going to get born, I'm going to get old, I'm going to get sick, and I'm going to die again, and then I'm going to get born again. Okay? And in all these lives, I'm going to keep on having problems because we try so hard to have happiness, we can't get the happiness we want, or sometimes we get what we want and it's unsatisfactory, we're still discontent and disillusioned. And then the suffering that we don't want and we try to avoid, it comes automatically. So the middle level practitioner starts to really look at the nature of cyclic existence and say, cyclic existence stinks. This really stinks. I don't want to be here anymore. Okay, there is no purpose, no meaning, no happiness in this. Okay? And so that person, through understanding the disadvantages of cyclic existence and through understanding what causes cyclic existence, the afflictions and karma, so that person meditates on the first two noble truths, truth of suffering, or truth of dukkha, unsatisfactory experiences, and truth of its origin, the afflictions and the karma that cause it. So that person meditates on that. From that meditation, they develop the determination to be free of cyclic existence and to attain liberation. Okay, that is what we often call renunciation in Buddhism. Okay, some people think renunciation means you go and live in a cave. No. Some people think renunciation means you shave your head and put on robes. Not necessarily. Okay, renunciation is giving up suffering and the causes of suffering and aspiring for happiness and the causes of happiness. That's what renunciation means, the determination to be free. Okay? So the middle level practitioner generates that determination to be free. Yeah. Then what do they practice in order to free themselves from cyclic existence? They practice the fourth noble truth, which is true path. And that gives rise to the third noble truth, which is true cessations, or nirvana. Okay? Nirvana is the state of having freed ourselves from cyclic existence and all of its causes. So it's a lasting state of peace. And the path that we practice to get it is often called the path. Sometimes it's called the 3 higher trainings, and sometimes it's called the Noble Eightfold Path, but those two mean the same thing. The 3 higher trainings are the higher training in ethical discipline, higher training in concentration, higher training in wisdom. Okay? Within the higher training of ethical discipline, in the Eightfold Path, then we have right action, right speech, and right livelihood. Within the second one, the higher training in concentration, we have right mindfulness and right concentration and right effort. Okay? Within the third one, the higher training in wisdom, we have right intention and right realization. Okay? So the Noble Eightfold Path all fits into the 3 higher trainings. Okay? And we practice that, and then through practicing that, we're able to free ourselves from cyclic existence which means that we've eliminated all causes of suffering in our own mind. So then we have real freedom, then we have real happiness. Our mind is no longer bound. Okay? That's the middle level practitioner. Now, the higher level practitioner says, nirvana's wonderful. Yeah, getting out of cyclic existence is wonderful. But getting myself out, well, I'm only one person. And there's countless sentient beings. And is it really right to work just for the benefit of myself? What about everybody else? Because that person begins to look around and says, you know, everybody else is exactly like me. They want to be happy. They don't want to suffer. They're all exactly like me. Some people may get happiness out of eating noodles, and some people get happiness out of eating rice, but we all want to be happy. And some people want to be free of the suffering of being hot, and other people want to be free of the suffering of being cold, but we all want to be free of suffering. And there's no difference whatsoever between us. That person really starts to feel their interconnectedness with others, how we're all the same. And then that person also thinks about the kindness of other sentient beings. And they begin by thinking, you know, when I was born, when I came into this world, I didn't have anything. Now, I couldn't feed myself, I couldn't talk, couldn't change my own diaper, couldn't do anything. Didn't even have any money when we were born. Came into the world completely broke, didn't we? And what happened is, look at the kindness we've received. Now, we came into the world broke, naked, and hungry. And look at us right now. You know, we have food, we have clothes, we have medicine, we have a place to live. Where did all of this come from? Came from other living beings, didn't it? Okay. So everything we know, everything we have, all the talents and qualities we develop, it all comes because of other people, you know, other living beings. And so the advanced level practitioner really begins to think of the kindness of others. And they go through it in a very detailed way, thinking in detail about the kindness of their parents, and remembering that all living beings have been our parents at one time or another, in one or another of our rebirths, and so wanting to repay that kindness. And that person also looks around and says, not only have my friends and relatives been kind to me, but also strangers have been kind. All the people who do the various jobs in society, you know, I benefit from their work. And also, even the people who have harmed me who have been kind, because even when people have hurt our feelings or cheated us or harmed us in some way, still they've caused us, they've provoked us or instigated us to develop our inner resources that we hadn't developed before. So we even have to thank the people who have harmed us, because inadvertently they have caused us to grow and mature and develop good qualities. And so that person begins to, the higher level practitioner, begins to really appreciate all living beings, to see them as lovable. And then they generate love, which is the wish for sentient beings to have happiness in its causes. They generate compassion, the wish for sentient beings to be free of suffering in its causes. They think about the disadvantages of self-centeredness and the benefit of others. Yeah, they see themselves and others as equal, and they even begin to see that caring for others is more important than just selfishly caring for ourselves, because others are more numerous and there's only one of me. And then that person does a meditation called Taking and Giving, in which they imagine taking on the suffering of others and giving them their happiness. And they develop the great resolve to actually bring happiness to others and eliminate their misery. And then as a result, that person generates the bodhicitta, which is the mind that aspires to benefit sentient beings most effectively and aspires to become a Buddha so that they can actually benefit sentient beings most effectively. Okay? So those are the meditations leading up to the generation of bodhicitta. Okay? That bodhicitta is the motivation of the higher level practitioner. And then what does that higher level practitioner do to actualize the enlightenment that they're seeking? They practice the 6 perfections, or the 6 far-reaching attitudes, and the 4 ways of gathering disciples and spreading the Dharma. And they also do the tantric practice, okay, the generation and completion stages of Tantra, or the yoga with signs and the yoga without signs. Okay? So in the practice of the 6 far-reaching attitudes, 6 perfections, that person practices the perfection of generosity, the perfection of ethical discipline, perfection of patience, perfection of joyous effort, perfection of meditative stabilization, and the perfection or far-reaching attitude of wisdom. Okay? And they gather disciples by being generous, by speaking pleasantly, by teaching them the Dharma, and by acting as a good example, by practicing what they preach. And then they engage, when they're qualified, when they have some degree of renunciation, remembering, renunciation means wanting to be free of cyclic existence and attain liberation. When they have some degree of bodhicitta, the wish to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of others, when they have some understanding of wisdom, then the person enters the tantric practice and takes the tantric vows, takes initiation, and begins that practice. Okay? And through that, then they're able to actualize full enlightenment. Okay? So you see, we just talked about, in the space of 1 hour, how to go from waking up in the morning thinking about coffee to becoming a fully enlightened being where our mind is totally liberated, and where, anytime we see any living being, our first reaction is love and compassion and bodhicitta. Yeah. And to becoming a fully enlightened being where we no longer get angry. I mean, imagine what that would be like, to never get angry. Wow. Sounds good, huh? To never feel hurt, to never feel left out, to have all your internal resources and skills and capabilities fully developed right there at your fingertips. I mean, enlightenment is wonderful. Seems like I haven't attained it, long way to go, but it really sounds good. And then plus, because the mind is completely freed of any defilements, then an enlightened being is able to manifest many, many different bodies according to what they need to become to benefit other sentient beings. So from the side of a Buddha, they aren't limited by what they can do to benefit others. But just spontaneously, effortlessly, all their actions go in that direction. Okay? So that gives you a little bit of an overview of how, all these different meditations fit together into a whole comprehensive path that we start at the beginning and we slowly develop with time. Okay? Now it's helpful to have this whole broad understanding, because even though we may not be bodhisattvas right now, we can still aspire to be bodhisattvas. And even though our spontaneous motivation isn't, I want to become a Buddha to benefit sentient beings. Still, intellectually, we can generate that motivation, and we can have a lot of regard and appreciation for that motivation. So by learning the later levels of the path, it enables us to keep them in mind and to cultivate them on a conceptual and intellectual level, even though right now we're baby beginners back meditating on precious human life and impermanence and death, and trying to stop being so attached to our own pleasure. Okay? So having all the teachings and bearing the higher levels in mind gives us an idea of the direction we're going in, yeah, and enables us to, at least in our hearts on some level, have that higher aspiration, even though we're practicing according to our own level right now. So it's kind of like somebody who's in primary school who hears other people talking about going to university, and they're still learning their ABCs, but they say, wow, university sounds kind of good. I want to go in that direction. Okay? So even though you're not there yet, you know something about it, and you know you want to go there. So that, too, is similar for us, why we learn about the higher levels of the practice and keep them in mind and cultivate them to some extent. But what we're really trying to do is work at the lower levels so that we can actually transform our behavior and our mind according to those levels, and then gradually work upwards. Okay, so that's a little bit about the gradual path. How about if we have some discussion and Q&A right now? You can ask whatever you like. So her question is about the Pure Land practice. I'll repeat all the questions, so you don't need to worry about that, Mike. You can just turn it off. Where does the Pure Land practice come in? Okay. I think the Pure Land practice, of, let's say, reciting the name of the Buddha, visualizing a particular Buddha, I think that comes in a couple levels. First of all, it comes in the level of refuge. Because when we visualize, let's say, Amitofo, or we visualize Kuan Yin, okay, we're thinking of them as the Buddha. And so we're meditating on refuge, on the Buddha's qualities, why they are a reliable guide. We're cultivating our conviction in the Buddhist path and generating a type of faith that is based on knowledge and understanding. Okay? So that's what we should be doing when we're doing the Pure Land practice. We're not just chanting Namo Amitabha, Namo Amitabha, Namo Amitabha, Namo Amitabha, Namo Amitabha, Namo Amitabha. Okay? But we should be actually, studying the qualities of the three jewels, understanding how the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, guide us on the path, and thinking about those qualities, thinking about why they are a reliable refuge when we're visualizing Amitofo and chanting his name. Okay? Also, I think the Pure Land practice comes in on the level of following karma. Yeah? So remember, refuge and following karma come in the practice of the initial level practitioner. Okay? Because when you're reciting Namo Amitofo, again, you're not just spaced out, but you're imagining Amitofo in front of you, or Kuan Yin, and then light coming from them into you, and that light, as it comes in, you think that it purifies all the negative karma. So there you start meditating on karma and the attributes of karma. You start doing a little bit of a life review and identifying your own negative actions and regretting them. and making a determination not to do them again, and then thinking that this light comes and purifies. Okay? So I think that, the Pure Land practice can be used to purify karma, coming under that practice of the initial level being. My own theory, too, is that the Amitabha practice, although it's not, in China, it's not said to be a Vajrayana practice. I think it is, because in the Tibetan system of Vajrayana, you find the Amitabha practice. And there's a whole detailed way of how to do that meditation. So it's not just simply chanting Namo Amitofo, but there's a whole way to use that practice, to develop ethical discipline and concentration and wisdom. You meditate on emptiness while you're doing the Pure Land practice. So I think if we look in the writings of the ancient Chinese sages, you'll find a much fuller explanation of Pure Land practice than what you actually find in temples nowadays, where most people, don't bother to ask the teacher what the meaning of the text is. Okay? Yeah, but I think there's actually a lot of profundity in that practice and many qualities you can develop by doing it after you've had the teachings on how to do that. So, very good question. Okay, there's talks about the Buddha. The question is about Tantra. Seems like there's a couple of questions. One was the origin of Tantra, and one was about the practice in saying that in the Tantra, you can visualize yourself as a Buddha, but when you come out of that visualization, you're still you. Okay? From the Vajrayana viewpoint, they say that the Buddha appeared in the form of Vajradhara and gave the tantric teachings to a select group of disciples who were at that level in their practice where they could understand them. So that those teachings were not widely given. In terms of the second question, although we imagine ourselves as being a Buddha when we do Vajrayana meditation, first of all, we meditate on emptiness before we imagine ourselves to be a Buddha. So it's not a big ego trip. It's not, I'm a Buddha. Okay? Because if you have that strong feeling of, I'm a Buddha, everybody should bow down to me, everybody should make offerings to me, you are not practicing Dharma, you're practicing ego. And there's a big difference between ego and Dharma. Okay? So that's why any of the meditation of imagining oneself in the form of a Buddha figure is done with renunciation, with bodhicitta, and it's prefaced by a meditation on emptiness, so that that feeling of this big I gets evaporated, and it's the wisdom realizing emptiness that manifests in the form of the deity. Now, for most people, we go through this process in a very intellectual way by trying to understand it in a deeper and deeper level. And slowly, some understanding comes. So even for people doing Vajrayana, if they don't have deep renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom, they may imagine themselves as a Buddha, but they may not really feel that they're a Buddha because they haven't accrued the qualities before in their meditation to actually feel like they are a Buddha. Okay, so even in their meditation, they're not feeling like they're Buddha. Then, of course, even if sometimes in your meditation you succeed because you generate bodhicitta and renunciation, you do a meditation on emptiness, okay, then you do your meditation, you feel a little bit like, oh, it's possible for me to become a Buddha. And then after the meditation, you try and retain that same state of mind. And the reason for that is that if we think of ourselves as a Buddha, okay, if somebody comes along and criticizes us, and says, you know, Joe, you're really a jerk. You know, I made such a bad decision hiring you in this company. You're just really too much. Okay? Then, if you're a Buddha, does a Buddha get hurt and angry and upset when they're criticized? No. A Buddha's able to say, yeah, there might be some truth in what you're saying. I have to work on it. Okay? So seeing yourself as a Buddha is a technique that we practice to avoid attachment and anger in the break times when we go through our daily life. Okay, that's the purpose of seeing ourselves as a Buddha. It's not to become more egotistical. Okay? But it's more to think, you know, and this can be very helpful in our daily life when you have a problem, to think, you know, if the Buddha were in my shoes right now, what would the Buddha do? How would the Buddha feel about this person? What would the Buddha say to this person? Okay. And so that becomes very helpful because it opens our own mind to different ways of understanding situations instead of being constantly locked into our limited knee-jerk emotional response that is afflicted and deluded. Okay? Yeah, I mean, it's important to learn the Dharma properly, and not just learn it from reliable teachers, but develop the correct understanding of the Dharma in our own mind. Because we can hear it from great teachers, but we can misunderstand it. Okay, so it's important to really think about the Dharma, discuss it with people, debate it, ask questions, and then when we have a correct understanding, then really meditate on it and integrate it into our lives, especially our daily life.